Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. What we are going to cover today is governance tips for the Power Platform, especially on Power Apps and Power Automate. My name is Girish Nerigadi, and I'm a program manager in the Power Apps team. A lot of what is going to be shared here has been covered in detail in a lot of the sessions, but the hope is that we can just run through this super quick and just kind of plant seeds. I'm not sure how many. This is very focused on the admin persona. So are there a lot of admins here, or okay? We do got to put on the hat of an admin persona when you go through this, just to make sure. But so let's start. I'll start with the context, just to set a context to the Power Platform. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this a lot of times, but it's our low-code platform, which covers, contains Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, the new Power Virtual Agent that has been talked about. All of this sit under the common data service. It's a database layer which is built on top of SQL and Azure. The ecosystem, very specifically again on Power Apps, it's easy to plug this into in an Office 365 system, Dynamics system, Azure ecosystem. In fact, you can build apps against any LOB systems that you have. But this is a broad set of tools that we call the Power Platform. And the question is more around governance. How do we govern this? And the reason for that is, again, the momentum that we've seen with this platform has been phenomenal. Just over the last 1 year, 700% growth in Power Apps, petabytes of data being stored in the CDS database. And so a lot of companies have been trying this. This comes as a part of your Office E3 license. Anyone who has an Office E3 license can activate the Power Platform. And so a lot of people are trying this out. And so the question that we get from a lot of companies, enterprises especially, is, this is great, so now you have a tool, a low-code platform, which allows people close to the business to actually start being a part of the digital innovation stream, but how do I make sure that I have the guardrails in place? And that's kind of what we want to cover here. So the key, from what we have seen a few successful companies in terms of implementing a governance strategy very early on. So the key is making sure that you think about a governance strategy really early in the journey when you think about your Power Platform. You don't want it to become after the fact. It could get pretty difficult if that is the case. And so what we're going to cover here is just a basic framework, just a simple set of steps. We bucket that into 3 groups. One is securing your tenant. 2 is how do you monitor the tenant's activity. And 3 is how do I set up alerts and act on that activity. And this is important because when you look at the Power Platform, when you look at securing your tenant, this is a tool that will help a lot of folks who are close to the business to actually come out and automate and do a lot of things. So you have the pro dev persona within the IT Center of Excellences, which they do their stuff. But you also have a lot of people. You're going to have a lot of people on the business side who's going to try out things and automate stuff. And it could be me as a business user building something for 5 people, and then I realize 50 people want it. Okay, now I need IT's help. So it's important from a securing perspective to make sure we understand the lay of the land. As an admin, I want to make sure who are building apps and what kind of apps. I want to make sure that early on I make sure that I understand that. The next thing that I would say we do is you got to have an environment strategy. So the question is, what is an environment? Environment is a basic container that basically hosts everything that you think about in this platform, your apps, your Power Automate, your connections, your data connectors, all of that sit within an environment. And every environment is tied to a geographic location. So I build an environment in France, it's tied to France. If I build it in the US, it's tied to the US. And every tenant has a default environment. It comes as a default environment. The default environment, it's important that we understand the default environment. I'm not going to get into the details here, but anyone with an Office 365 E3 license and above will have access to the default environment. So when we get into connectors, we'll talk about it. You also have non-default environments that admins can set up. you have a lot more control on who can do what within a non-default environment. So when we think of an environment strategy, one of the things we want to do is restrict the creation of new trial and production environments. This started off as a low-code platform, and the idea was you empower people to build it. But it also means if you don't do something like restricting this early on, you're going to have environment sprawl. We have seen that from a few companies where you have thousands of environments, most of them not really being used, but you just get this environment sprawl. So you want to make sure you restrict that, and you can actually do that through. This is I don't know if people here have used the PPAC admin site for the Power Platform. If you go to admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com, you can actually go in as a tenant admin. You can go and make sure that you restrict this. This is important that you do early on in the cycle, because you're going to definitely otherwise have environment sprawl. We are coming out with, very soon over the next few weeks, there's a new role. Until now, you had to assign a D365 admin role to manage these, the Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI. But we do have a new role, the Power Platform Service Admin role, which does not require someone to have the D365 admin role. So making sure that everyone who is an admin gets that role. You don't want people to have the D365 admin role if it's not required. So coming back to the default environment, you want to make sure the default environment, which is used and accessible by everyone, we recommend renaming it as a personal productivity tool, and making sure you have some DLP policies, which we'll talk about. We also have seen successful companies, actually automating the process of requesting and creating new environments. So once you restrict the creation of new trial environments, you want to make sure there's a process for restricting and creating new environments. And definitely leveraging Azure AD, which people do leverage across the enterprise. So this is an example of a sample environment. You have a default environment which comes for everyone, but renaming that, you have a test environment, you have a production. And this can be done for marketing, it can be done for finance, it can be done for different groups. But the idea is you don't want, if you're in finance, you don't want SOX applications sitting in the default environment built by some business user in the finance who with good intent has done it, but you don't want that. So you want to make sure, and this is just a sample, but this is something to think about. You have your test separate, production separate, and the controls get stronger as you go, into the production environment. So we have now, so from an environment strategy, the next question then is, okay, so then what? So, making sure that we leverage the 5 layers of security, and we say 5, but it's basically the basic security constructs that are available. Azure AD conditional access. We have some very large firms using that really successfully. Making sure it's, this is accessible only from certain devices, certain browsers, certain IP addresses, using Azure AD conditional access. Assigning the right environment roles. When you create an environment, you want to make sure, firstly, the people in that environment are really required to be in that environment. They have the right roles. We've seen a lot of cases where everyone is an admin. You don't want that scenario. Simple things like that, making sure your CDS database, if you're using CDS, the security roles are assigned, making sure that people don't have access to data or tables that they don't have. One important thing that if you're not a multinational cross-tenant kind of company is making sure you don't allow inbound and outbound data to move between tenants. And this is important because a lot of companies have, ContosoUSA.com and ContosoUK.com. They are different tenants all within AD, but the same company has a bunch of different tenants. And so they need to move data from the US to UK to Australia or whatever. But they happen to be different tenants. And so the Power Platform allows that using the connectors. But you don't want, if you're a company which is not that, and it could be a case where I'm just a tenant, I have contractors who work. So I am a contractor. I work for a company. I have an alias there, and I also use AD in my contracting company. If they are under the Azure AD ecosystem, you could create an app which pulls data from SharePoint in this company that I work for to the company that actually pays me kind of stuff. So you want to make sure this is important. You right now have to raise a support ticket, but you want to do that early on when you look at Power Apps, and make sure that if you don't need it, you actually close that. So this is important. And the most important thing, which we have seen again a lot, is securing data at rest. a lot of companies, it may sound silly, but we find a lot of people having access to SQL, to their Oracle systems, to different systems which are just not required. And it happens where someone says, hey, can you give me access for a few days? I just need a report. And they forget about it. But the reason we say that is, Power Apps and Power Automate does not escalate privileges. So we keep getting this. People keep calling us or talking to us saying, hey, this has become a problem. But the reality is you want to secure data at rest. So that is super important, a small thing, but we see this again and again where companies don't lock down the data. And so that does become a huge security risk. So you want to make sure you follow some basic steps here from a security perspective. We also have a DLP. We call this data loss prevention ability to set DLP policies. And what it is basically you can go into the admin center and set your connectors, the connectors which connect into your SQL, Azure, the entire Office ecosystems, put them into two buckets. One called business data and one no business data. And all that it does is if you decide, I don't want anyone moving data from my SharePoint to Google Drive, this does not allow that. Connectors in this, you cannot use a single app, build a single app which moves data from here to the using the connector. You cannot use both the connectors in a single app. We are coming out with the ability to block third-party connectors. That's been a big ask. So what it means is all non-Microsoft connectors, non-Office, non-Azure, non-SQL connectors. We actually could block it at the tenant level. So as an admin, again, you might say, I don't want people in my company to use Google Drive or Twitter or YouTube or whatever. So you could block those connectors in addition to this. We hope to have a private preview soon, but it's a feature that's going to be out soon. I'm not sure how many people here are familiar with custom connectors and HTTP connectors, but they support DLP too. Custom connectors is something that a developer could build to connect into a homegrown LOB system, and I could use that as a citizen developer to build a Power App. And so, that is a risk. That is a risk. One of the features we are looking at shipping over the next few months is also the ability to whitelist endpoints so that the admins have control on what endpoints can actually be used in a custom connector. We don't have that yet, but we're working on that. But the blocking connectors definitely should be available sometime in Jan timeframe. So the question is then, if we had to recommend a DLP strategy, let's assume we have the ability to block connectors. What we would say is, make sure that at the tenant level, you block all third-party connectors. So then as a tenant, again, it depends. If you're in the financial sector, you're in the healthcare sector, this becomes super important. Some of the others, it's not so. But if you do that, what it means is no one in the company can access, using these tools, you're not going to be able to connect into Google or Twitter or Dropbox or anything of that sort. We do not allow you to block Microsoft connectors. It's only third-party connectors, just to re-emphasize that, when that comes out. And then the next thing is in the default environment, which is available for every Office user, you want to make sure one of the options is saying, I put all of the Office connectors in the business data, and I put everything else like Azure and SQL in the non-business data. And the reason for that is you have people in the business side not being able to access Azure and SQL. So you're basically saying you can go and do stuff against SharePoint, Excel, and all that stuff. So this is something, again, that you want to implement. And you want to take it as an option. You want to consider this as an option. And then the third thing is you could create specific environments. Like I'm in marketing. If I'm in marketing, I want to make sure in marketing, I want to be able to use these connectors. So you could set up those policies. But this is kind of a broad framework, which some of the very successful early adopters of the Power Platform have actually done. We do not have, to be clear, we do not have the block connectors yet. But when we have it very soon, over the next 2-3 months, this is something that we do recommend. So from an admin perspective, again, let's put on the hat of an admin. You've secured your tenant, some basic things, environment, security, setting up DLP. So the question then is, how do I monitor? Is there something that I can monitor? What we strongly suggest is setting up activity logs. You can go to the Office site. It is integrated with that. You want to set up activity logging for Power Apps and Flow. There's a bunch of things. I don't want to drain through this, but you know who published an app, deleted an app, who's changing stuff for both Flow and Power Apps. All of that is available through APIs. You definitely want to set this up before you actually roll out your Power Apps, the Power Automate capabilities. We also have a lot of analytics, out-of-the-box analytics available on the admin site. I don't know if, let me see if I can. So if you go to aka.ms.ppack, there's a bunch of analytics that you can see here for CDS, Power Apps, the old Microsoft flow. The names have not changed, but it's all around workflows, not the RPA stuff, but the workflow stuff, Power Apps. You can also go and see your capacity. It's especially on CDS, how much of database am I using? What's my file usage, logs usage? Because you pay for storage in the CDS world. But let's go to Power Apps actually here. So you see a lot of different kinds of reports. Usage reports. You can use these different filters. We use Power BI embedded as a service, but you can filter this based on your device, your player version. You can go and see locations. This is a Microsoft internal app that we have. It's being used across the world. So for example, I want to know in Australia how many people have launched it. I get 550. So we have some data on that. We also have some data around API performances. What's my best performing, worst performing? There could be a custom API that I build as a developer within the context of my company. I could go and filter that and see how it's performing. That's an option. We also have app usage. How many apps are being used? How many launches, unique users across the environment. All of this is at an environment level, not at the tenant level. We also, when you look at flow, one of the things that has been really, we see a lot of customers have asked for it and really useful is around connectors. A lot of concern for admins is, are people using connectors to pull data out? Let's assume data is secure at rest, but if it is not the case, they want to see and detect patterns. Like in this case, I have a SQL connector which is being used, called 18,000 times, and I realize it was built by somebody here. He works in finance. Why is he doing that? Why does he really need it? So this is something that has been really useful. We're going to have the same thing for Power Apps, but a lot of reporting, is basically available in this site. It's the analytic admin center site for the Power Platform. So from a monitoring perspective, you want to definitely take a look at activity logging, analytics. All of that we show you, the data is available through PowerShell commandlets and reporting tools. So you can use APIs and build it on your own if you want. I would not do it, but if somebody wants to extend it, definitely they can do that. So again, with an admin hat, I've secured my tenant. I'm going to roll out the Power Platform. I'm securing my tenant. I'm monitoring the activity. So now, is there an option for me to set up some alerts and act on that? Yes, you can. What we recommend is, again, using all the PowerShells and commandlet tools, you can actually do a lot of the governance yourself. For example, you want to know, who is adding a lot of custom connectors. Or, I want to know what custom connectors are being added. I want to change the owner of apps or workflows. All of that information, you can actually get it through the commandlets. You can actually build your own process. But having said that, what we would strongly recommend is downloading this kit. This should be in the product, but it was built by our customer success team. But right now, it's a great starter kit. It has a lot of features that really is useful for an admin. Again, you got to put on the admin hat. So I'll give you one example is the DLP editor. We talked about data loss prevention policy. So I go in, I create a policy, and it breaks an app. You can prevent that by looking at this using this DLP editor, which actually tells you, if I do this policy, these are the apps which are going to be impacted. So you definitely want to make sure you download the starter kit. And the best thing about this is you can download it and then use the commandlets and the management connectors to extend it. So you want to use this, start with this, and then extend it. It also gives you tenant-level reporting when you start off. It may not suffice for a very large company eventually, but in the early stages, it will. It has a bunch of templates around, the nurturing stuff, which we are not going to cover here. But it's a great toolkit. I would strongly recommend everyone to take a look at that, at least take a look at it, read about it, and if you're going out with, if you're starting to use the Power Platform, making sure that you actually use it. And the last thing is, fostering a Power community. some of the most successful companies have been the ones where you're able to share and making sure the best practices are shared, setting a center of excellence. We call it a center of enablement. But making sure that that happens at the earlier stages versus the later stages, it just gets much harder. But this is something that strongly we recommend people. If they're looking at the Power Platform and looking at that, you want to make sure you look at these things, looking at fostering a Power community at a very early stages. So I know it's very short. There's a lot of stuff. Actually, each of these, we can really go into the details. We don't have time here, but again, I'm trying to plant some seeds for people who are looking at it from an admin persona perspective. You want to make sure you secure your tenant. You have an environment strategy. Do not allow environment sprawl. Make sure you do that. You put some basic security in place. Security at rest, definitely, but the environment roles, security roles, setting up DLP policies. That's the first thing. The second thing is making sure you set up activity logging for monitoring, and then you use the analytics out of the box just to make sure you're monitoring what's going on. You can obviously extend that with the cmdlets, connectors, and all of that. And then you want to use the COE starter kit. Definitely download the COE starter kit, extend that, but it's a great tool to make sure that you can actually set up your own governance policies. So things like, we talked about requesting environments. That process is already available. They have a template available. It's easy to start. You might feel you need to extend it. Easy to do that with the connectors and PowerShell cmdlets. And so these are some basic things. This is just a basic framework. I'm not going to claim that this is the end all of things, but if you're looking to start your Power Platform journey, you want to make sure you just follow these basic steps early on versus later on. Thank you.